Okay, welcome everybody on in. Good job being here. So far, I think this class seems to be going well. So I'm seeing a large amount of participation. Just keep that up over the course of the semester, and that should be good, right? People are showing up to the meetings. People seem to be doing the homework, stuff like that. That's really good. I do want to mention that that census date that I talked about on the first day of class is approaching, which means, in fact, I got an email about it today just reminding us all professors that that census date is approaching, which means that I have to drop people from the course that don't look like they're participating in the course. So make sure that you're up to, basically up to date as far as where you should be with stuff and that you're finishing stuff, because I have to be able to make the case that, yes, this person is on track to pass the class. Otherwise, I'm supposed to drop you. All right, they're already sending out the emails. That will happen in the next couple days. Probably Wednesday and Thursday, I'll go through and start dropping people who don't look like they're doing assignments, don't look like they're participating. Basically, they aren't really taking the class seriously. I have to drop those people. So for most of you, you don't have to worry about that because you've been doing the homework, you've been staying up to date with things, and there's no worries there. For a couple of you, if it now's kind of do or die, right? In the next 2 days, I'll go through, and if you don't have work done, you get dropped. But those people probably didn't show up for today's meeting either. So maybe maybe they should get dropped because maybe they don't even want to be in this class. They just forgot they signed up for it or something. So basically, that's where we're at. For those of you who are largely up to date, good job. We have a lot of weeks left in this course. A mathematics course is not a sprint, it is a marathon. And so just keep that in mind. You should be working on statistics almost every day, right? I realize you're not going to do it every single day between now and December or whatever, 14th or something. We haven't seen when the final schedule comes out yet, but basically, you should be working on it almost every day. That's how mathematics gets done. A lot of people want to treat math as a series of sprints where I don't do statistics for 3 or 4 days, and now I'm going to spend like my whole evening doing it, or half my day doing it. Now I'm not going to do it for 3 or 4 days. Now I'm going to spend half my day doing it. That is a way to not pass your class. You just don't retain it after a couple hours, right? The brain's kind of like a muscle. It gets worn out. It's not a muscle technically, but it acts that way. Your brain gets fatigued, and even if you can still keep doing problems, right? I hear this from students all the time. They're like, oh, I was getting the problems right when I was working on it last night, but now I can't seem to do any of them. That's because you were doing it on hour 5 or 6. Your brain is fatigued, and it doesn't form those synapses the way that it does when you learn other things when you're fresh. So you may have been able to complete the homework, but you have no idea how to do those problems again because you've lost your retention. So, treat it like a marathon. What you want to be doing is almost every day coming in, doing some statistics. If you do that for the same amount of time spent on the class, you're actually going to learn it much better, right? This is for almost everything. Musical instruments, right? If you're learning a musical instrument, your teacher will recommend you should spend an hour a day learning this. Excuse me. You should spend an hour a day learning this musical instrument. They don't say ignore it for 6 days and then spend 7 hours on Sunday learning your musical instrument. Why? Because your brain just gets fatigued after a couple hours, and you're not actually benefiting from that extra work. If you spend 1 hour a day working on statistics, you're going to retain almost all of that information, right? Everyone forgets a little thing here and there, but as far as planning, how you plan out the rest of your semester, we take two students, and they spend the same amount of time on this class. The student who spends time on the class every day, but for shorter periods, and the student who just tries to catch up on the weekends, that student who spends less time but every day will outperform the student who's just looking at it on Sundays to get caught up. So, and I know it's a harsh world we live in where trying to survive and go to school and that kind of stuff is brutal. I get it. Everyone has jobs, everyone has family and other obligations and stuff like that. But it's just a bit of a tip. You will do much better if you can work on this a little bit every single day. Your mind's gonna learn it a lot better. So keep that up. You'll notice some changes to Canvas now. I've basically opened up everything. So if you're someone where this is the only class you're taking this semester, feel free to zip on ahead, right? You're gonna be ahead of some of the information that I give you in the lessons. But if students want to work ahead and learn some of that material, go for it. Okay. So you can see it's a lot. The reason I don't put the whole course up here on day one is it's kind of overwhelming. And the first couple of weeks, what I really want is for students. Oh, yeah. Oh, sorry. I was unmuted for a second. I get it's a lot. So I try not to overwhelm students in the first couple weeks, because in the first couple weeks, what I'm trying to get you to do is just get the homework set up properly, kind of get used to how the Zoom meetings are going to work and all that kind of stuff. But hopefully we're kind of at that point where people are pretty comfortable. So I've opened it up. The dates are changed. So the dates should all be pretty good, except there's one date that is going to change, and that's for the very last project assignment. See how it says project completed December 7th? The project for this class will actually be due at the time of the final exam. So unfortunately, they still have not published the final exam schedule for the college. They used to do it like a semester ahead of time. So you would have known when you registered what the final exams were. For some reason, they're waiting until halfway through the semester now to do that. So I don't actually know when our final is going to be because it hasn't been posted yet. But whenever it's posted, that's when the final exams will be due. Now, I want to let you know there's probably going to be a bonus for turning the project in early, right? I've done this in the past. If you turn it in, and we'll talk specifics when we get to that point, but if you turn it in early, you get like an extra 10% or something. So it's not a huge bonus. It's not like you can turn in a junky project and you're still going to pass the class or something, but it helps, right? It helps a little bit. And part of the reason for that is that this semester I'm probably going to have about 100 of these videos to watch. So if I can start watching them a few days earlier, that's going to give me a bit of a jump to just to get through them, so that I'm not like, it's going to take me days and days to get through all these videos. So the ones that are turned in early are going to get a little bit of a boost. You still have to turn in a quality project, but you'll get a little bit, a little slice of some extra on that. So this date right here may change, this December 7th, to whatever, well, it will change to whatever the actual final exam date is whenever they let us know what that's going to be. Okay, I don't get to decide when the final is. I'm told when the final is. And the way it works is I have to have something due that's worth a significant number of points at the final exam. We're required to do that. So usually that's an exam where you would come in and take a test. But since this class is project-based, that means the project will be due at the time of the final exam. Yeah, here's a great question. Would there be a chance for us to watch a video from previous classes so we have an example of what a good project looks like? That's a great question, and I find that it doesn't work well if I do that, and I totally get why you're asking, and it's completely a reasonable question. The problem is if I really give you a lot of room and creativity on this project, if I'm too specific or give an example about what I'm looking for, basically what I get is 100 copies of that video, where people just copy that video and insert their own stuff. Statistics is really about sort of making your own decisions and going through there. So I get that that's very challenging, but I also keep that in mind when I'm grading. I keep in mind that what I'm asking you to do is a little bit higher level of difficulty, but what happens is I actually see much better work out of my students, right? Like some students have said, well, can you make a detailed rubric? But when I've done that, what happens is students treat it like a checklist where they're like, okay, I've done this, 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 and this, so therefore I should get an A. And they actually turn in really like a weak project because they did each things on the list, but they kind of did it in a very superficial, shallow way. So what I find is letting students sort of use their own creativity to create the project actually we come up with much better projects. I see much better work if I don't give you a video guide to go from, or I don't give you a checklist rubric. The quality of stuff turned in actually is far superior. And I know that's frustrating, but again, I keep that in mind when I'm grading, right? If you turn in quality work and you talk about hypothesis testing, confidence intervals, scatter plots, correlation, you make some visuals, you make some conclusions, you do those things, you're going to be good. If you do that in a meaningful way. It's just that I find that like I say, I'm doing it because I find this is the way that gives me the best quality of work. So students learn more, basically, which is my job, is to do the things that make students learn the most. Now, I'm a resource, right? So I have sometimes I have groups that check in with me like every 2 or 3 weeks. The group comes to office hours and they're asking me, we're stuck on this part of our project. What do you give us some insight. And then I'll talk to you about what you're working on. Like, you'll explain, well, we tried to do this, but it's not coming out right, and we think maybe our graph is wrong. What's going on? And I'll totally help you with that. So the help that I give you in office hours, and whatever, if we have to schedule a different time to meet in Zoom or something, we can do that. But the office hours throughout the semester are not just to answer questions that you have on the homework. It's also to help you with this project, right? So not every group will take advantage of that, but if your group is stumped on something, like if you should get together and discuss things as a group first. But then if your group is stumped and you go, I'm not sure how to do this thing. He's telling us to come up with some confidence intervals for our questions, but I don't really get it. Come talk to me in office hours, and I will absolutely have a conversation with you, and I'll talk to you about your data, and I'll help you. I'll point you in the right direction so that you can move forward with that thing, right? So, but it works better in general if students have a little bit more freedom and creativity to make the projects how they see fit, because like I've mentioned with statistics, there's so many different choices you can make along the way that it doesn't help if I box people in by giving you an example and saying, this is what you should do, this is what your project should be, because then students they basically just copy that. So if you have any kind of questions, please come talk to me, and I will answer any kind of questions that you have. I mean, for the most part, sometimes I might just point you in the right direction so that you're doing the actual work, but I will fill in any kind of uncertainties that you have, or any kind of questions about what the expectations are for the project. I will answer all those kinds of questions for you, right? So that you can still experience putting the statistics together in the proper way. And basically these, when we're doing these, we haven't really started it yet, but what you'll see is if you do this correctly, you will have most of the project done before the end of the semester, right? I know we're still in the early stages. Where are we? We're up here. So we haven't even taken the survey yet. So you have a couple more days. Make sure you hit these timelines, because once these timelines go by, all of a sudden it's going to be a lot harder for you. So put your groups in here. That will be graded in a few days. Once that date passes, I'll go through and grade that. It's going to be harder for you to get in a group after that date. So try to form a group by that date. And then the survey questions, right? Once I put the survey together, if you go, oh, we put our survey questions together a week late, but here it is. Well, the survey's already been constructed and taken by the students. So if your questions are late, no one's going to answer them, and you won't have your data. So in the beginning here, these discussions that we have here are really about getting us started so that we can get started on it. But what you'll see is later, right, and then at some point I'll have you take the survey. But you can see later on these discussions change. Here's the project visuals. Well, here's what you're going to do in this. You're going to get together with your group, and you're actually going to talk about how to make the visuals. And each one of you is going to make your own visuals, but you'll be discussing as a group, what you found worked and what didn't work, and give each other some tips and go, oh, first I did my histogram like you did, but then I found if I did it this different way, it looked even better. Right, you can have those kinds of discussions, and then you'll have all your project visuals done. So in December, when you come back to actually make your presentation, you'll just pull the visuals from what you posted here, or hopefully you have them saved somewhere else. But you've done that work for your project visuals. So any kind of pie charts, which are usually not recommended, but some people like to make pie charts. You can do those. Pie charts have a number of negative aspects to them. They're not really seen as great tools, but whatever it is you want to make, histograms and pie charts and dot plots and whatever you think is appropriate for your data, you'll have already made them. So then you can go through and you can then you'll just pull them and put them in your graph. And then in the next chapter we talk about correlation. So when you go to make your final project, you've already done the work in the correlation. So you really want to do that work up front. Some students, I think, not many actually, students actually do pretty good about this because I think they understand if you do the work up front, it's going to save you a ton of work at the end. Like say here for project correlation, you could go through and you could do kind of a weak job and go, well, I'll end up doing it again at the end of the semester, but you'll have forgotten some stuff by the end of the semester. So if you do a really good job when you do this posting right here that's due on August 12th for your correlation, if you do a really good job, you're all ready to just plug it into your final project, right? There's no more like a bunch of work at the end. So if you do everything that you're supposed to do well ahead of time, that means the only work you'll have in the last couple weeks or the last week or something of school is actually just to take all the work you've done and create a video out of it, which is still a decent amount of work, but it's very different than trying to do all the semester-long mathematics and create the video, right? So by that point, it'll kind of have come together. And like I say, if we get to this point and your group is confused about correlation on the project, come talk to me, right? Come to office hours or pick one person to come talk to me. Sometimes a whole group will show up and talk to me. However you want to do it, right? That's what office hours are for. You're welcome to come in and have a discussion with me, and I'll talk over, oh, okay, well, I see what you've done here. Maybe you could make a couple of changes in this way, and it might work a little bit better for you. Or here's the expectation, or here's what I'm looking for a little bit more. Once I see the work that you've started to do, then I can give you some advice on how to make it a little bit better, okay? And then there's a couple chapters where we don't have that, like Chapter 6 doesn't have anything for the project. Now, you might use information from Chapter 6 in your project, right? In fact, that's one of those ones where if I see students doing that, it kind of catches my attention and go, oh, these students kind of went above and beyond. They made a connection that wasn't even really required for things. They were paying attention. These students know what's going on, right? That's what I'm going to be thinking when I grade that project. The same with Chapter 7, I believe. Yep. So there's no specific assignment to make for the project, but if you start talking about stuff from Chapter 7 and you include that in your project, I'm going to notice that because I'm going to go, oh, we didn't even have a discussion for that, and this student still took the information from Chapter 7 and integrated it into the project. This person really knows what they're doing, because remember, when I grade the projects, I'm not grading you on being a professional statistician that's in like a job level presentation where it has to look like, it was made by a professional, editing company or something like that. I'm just trying to figure out, did this person learn some information over the course of this semester? And if you take stuff from chapters 6 and 7 where there was no specific related project assignment and you include that, I'm going to go, this person seems like they really learned what was going on. Right? Same with Chapter 8 a little bit. Now, the problem is, or not the problem, but the reason there's not a specific assignment for Chapters 6, 7, and 8 is it might not apply to your problems, right? It might not make sense for what you're doing. It depends on this is why it's so hard to write a rubric or give you a specific video and say, try to make your project like this, because you're all different. You're all choosing different topics. You're all going to have different questions in your topics. It's difficult, right? So, you might look at Chapter 7 and go, that doesn't really it doesn't meet the narrative that we're trying to craft with our project, right? I mean, that's ultimately what you're doing with your project is you picked a topic and you're going to try to show us that there's some kind of connection or worthwhile connections to look at inside of that data. You might say, no, we've from our data, we think that people who eat, on a limited time window each day, right? That's a thing that's happening more and more with people eating is, we think that people who eat in a shortened window actually exercise more than people who eat throughout the whole day or something like that. Like that's an interesting connection. You can show that kind of stuff, but not every tool should be used all the time. That's part of why there's not just one checklist that you can go through and make your project. So like pie charts, right? Everyone kind of knows how to read a pie chart. A lot of times people want to include a pie chart it may be appropriate for you to include a pie chart, but usually pie charts are kind of frowned upon because they're not actually as good of a tool as people think they are, right? You see two sections and it's kind of, you can kind of go, well, the blue section is bigger than the red section, but is it 1.5 times bigger? Is it 2 times bigger? It's really hard to judge. Whereas with a histogram, you can judge things a lot better. So pie charts are frowned upon a lot of times in statistics. Does that mean that you should never use a pie chart? No, it just depends on your particular approach and subject that you're looking at. So it's kind of going to be different for everyone, right? Right, then we're back to estimating a parameter. That is definitely something. So basically these discussions that you see called project, if I was doing a project, those should definitely be in your project, right? You should definitely hit those. So if you're turning in a project and you're saying, my problem, then the things that we looked at didn't really make sense to include estimating a parameter, I'm going to be doubtful. I'm going to go, I think you probably should have included that somewhere in there, right? So like same with hypothesis testing. If you're missing hypothesis testing, I'm going to go, you kind of needed that in there. But there's a couple of these chapters where it's up to you whether you include them or not, right? When there's no project discussion at the end, that's your call, right? It just depends on how your project goes. So we talked, before I get into material, is there any questions? I haven't been getting any emails about this class, so I kind of assume everybody's okay. I haven't heard anything about the bookstore books being messed up or anything like that. As far as I can tell, everything's working properly. I haven't heard about any issues, so I'm going to assume it's okay. If you're having issues, come talk to me because now is the time to work on those and fix those. So the last time we talked, I let you know that the bookstore had your licenses for you. They are available, and they are right now. I think this is the last semester. They might tell us that it's continuing into the spring, but I kind of doubt it because they're making most of us be on campus again. Right now, your license for the homework is covered by the school, is basically paying the bookstore for your licenses. So contact the bookstore, tell them you're in my class, and they will line you up with getting the license for free. Otherwise, you're going to end up having to pay for it. So sometimes they run out of stock, and then you have to wait for them to order more. There are other classes that are using the same material. So you don't want to be in the group where all of a sudden they run out for 3 weeks, and then sometimes it takes them 6 to 8 weeks to get more stuff. You don't want to be in that group because you'll have to pay for it because you can't wait 8 weeks. You can't go 8 weeks without doing homework. So I would look into that and make sure you're taking advantage of that, right? I know what it's like being a student with no money. So if you can get the thing for free, that's pretty good. Okay. But I haven't heard any issues with that, so I'll assume it's all good. Okay, so make sure you're taking care of that. Let's see. Is that I think that's everything. We talked about the Canvas setup. The dates should be right. You can work your way through stuff. Leave those discussions. Yep, so the big thing coming up, form your groups. Where are we? Form your groups. Even if you're a group by yourself, go in and leave a message saying, you know what, I'm going to work on this by myself. That's okay. But the way it works, when I go through and grade this, it just shows me frame by frame. So it'll show me it's alphabetical. It'll show me the first student alphabetically, and it shows me their comments. If you have no comments, you get 0 points, right? Because I will assume that you didn't do anything. So you might say, oh, I'm in someone else's group. No, you got to leave it kind of says in there too. It says, discussions to be graded. To receive credit, you must, let's see. Sorry, I was thinking of a different one. But yeah, you kind of have to leave a message here. But what I'm saying is it's going to show me each of you students, and there has to be a message there. And then when there are comments there, I read them, and I make sure that it's like, relevant and meaningful, right? So there were like famous cases where like, a student got credit in I forget if it was a stats class or history class for turning in like a cookie recipe where the teacher wasn't really looking. I look at them and I read through them to make sure, is this a high quality response? Yes, full credit, right? And then I move on. But if yours is blank, then you won't get credit for that. So everyone needs to be leaving responses in all of these. Oh, there's a question about getting the free access code, but then they bought it online. I don't know the answer to that question. You would want to contact, at the bottom of the page, there's the customer service, like where you can get a hold of customer service at Pearson. That is who runs the My Stat Lab. They're really helpful with my students. Every once in a while, I'll have a student that gets a weird thing that I can't help them with because it's a technical problem with the software. Usually, they're very helpful with with getting that taken care of. So I would contact them and let them know, and then they can figure out if they can help you or not. So unfortunately, that's not a question I know the answer to. Okay, so make sure you form your groups, and then make sure you have a little bit of time to form your survey questions. So basically, you want to sit down in a group and decide your survey questions. You as an individual could do something differently if you want, but that's kind of the point of having the group, is that you can discuss stuff, and then any of the, when you do something by yourself, you might come up with some kind of ideas and go, this sounds like it's going to work really well. And then when you get together in the group, someone in the group can point out, oh, you want to be careful not to ask the question that way because you're going to run into problems down the road. So discussing that with your group is helpful. Now that requires that the people in your group are participating and doing the work, right? Whenever you do group work, there's always, not in every single group, but in every class, you're going to have people who show up to the group unprepared. They didn't do the work. They're hoping to just get the work from the other people in the group. Hopefully you don't have people like that in your group. Hopefully everyone shows up and everyone wrote their questions, and then you have a discussion about it. And then people may change and you go, oh, I wrote my questions, but I can see how a few of my questions are bad. And then you can use the information that you gain in your group. That's learning. That's the learning process. That's not freeloading. That's learning. But if you show up and you're like, sorry everybody, I'm so behind on the homework. I haven't even done the homework yet. And I didn't do the questions. Then you're just sort of taking the work from other people. And those people may decide, yeah, you're working on your own. The groups that you formed are not written in stone, right? Because I can't really manage people's, I can't really manage all of you on a personal level and how you interact with each other. So if a group finds halfway through the semester or partially through the semester that this isn't working, we're not a good group, maybe someone is saying things that make the rest of the group uncomfortable. Maybe someone is not really doing any of the work. They're not pulling their weight, and they're just sort of trying to, get by off the work of the other people in the group. That group is welcome to say, you know what, I think we're splitting into two groups now. I'm not going to force you to work with people that you think are obnoxious or not working or something like that. So that's up to you, right? Because that's kind of the easiest way to fix any kind of personal problems, right? And since I'm not there in the group, I everything I hear is hearsay. If people come to me and say, he's making comments that make me uncomfortable, or this person is showing up without having any work done, then I'm not there, so I don't know what's going on. The easiest thing for you to do would either say, well, I'm going to work on my own from now on, or me and this one person are going to work together, and that's sort of a thing that you can decide along the way. So hopefully that sort of, if you're thinking of showing up to a group without doing much work ahead of time, keep in mind they may start doing work without you. So try to show up prepared, right? That's just how you're supposed to do things. There's a question here: should a group have the same survey questions? I would recommend it. I would recommend that you have the same survey questions because you probably want to have that discussion. Three of you show up. You each have your 5 or 6 questions that you came up with. You probably have some that are the same, that overlap, but discuss them, because it may be that you figure out, oh, we kind of have the same question, but yours is worded better than mine. Let's use yours, right? That's not freeloading off someone because you did bring your own work. You prepared and tried to do it. You're just picking the best thing. And then everyone in the group kind of learned, oh, yeah, this is a better way of writing this question. Okay, so it's totally up to you, because at the end of the day, you're turning in a project that is just you. So you can do whatever you want. But the group is kind of a guiding process where you're going through it together. And so if you all have the same questions and same subject, then you're all going to be thinking about the same things. And when you get stuck, there's two other people that are working on the same problem as you, and you can ask them about it. That's kind of the idea. If you're doing your own thing that's very different than the rest of the group, then it's going to be harder for them to help you when those things go through, right? So then we get into, well, what kind of questions should you be creating for your survey, right? And this, I've told you some. I've given you some guidelines, but it's like anything with statistics, it gets way, way more complicated than just this. So I've said you should have at least 2 quantitative questions. So quantitative questions are a thing with a measurement in them, a numerical measurement. Think of something that we would take the mean of, right? The students think average, but in statistics we say mean. You wouldn't take the mean of people's phone numbers, so those are not quantitative questions, but you might take the mean of the age in the class. So, almost always at least one group asks, what's your age? Okay. Oh, by the way, you can use other questions as well. I think I mentioned this last time, but there's going to be probably 100 questions or more on the survey. If you get to a point where you're like, ooh, we should include this question in ours, feel free. Go right ahead. It's not like you have ownership over a particular question. You can use any of the information that you want. But 2 quantitative questions, so things that have a numerical measurement to them. Not just numerical, because that's like jersey numbers aren't really helpful. They're not really measuring anything, but things that measure height, weight, how old are you, how many units are you taking this semester, how many hours a week do you work at your job, how many kids do you have, how many times a week do you exercise, how many hours a week do you exercise. These are all questions I've seen in the past. These are all numerical type questions. These are all quantitative questions. You want to have 2 of those. If you don't have 2 of those, you're going to have a real hard time when it comes to the correlation section of what we're working on. When we're trying to look at lines of best fit and stuff like that, you're basically not going to be able to do it. So you want to have at least 2 quantitative questions that are related in some way. So for instance, we might look at height versus shoe size, right? So you'd kind of expect, well, it's not going to be perfect, because we can definitely find 2 people where one person has a larger shoe size but is shorter than people that are around that same shoe size, right? So, but you would expect overall, as shoe size gets bigger, you're probably going to see an increase in height, right? But it's not exactly linear. So what we're going to get is a scatter plot, and then we can see if there's how strong is the correlation between shoe size and height, right? Is it really strong, or is it just kind of there and it's kind of weak, or there's none at all, right? But see how I took those 2 quantitative questions? Shoe size is a measurement, height is a measurement, and we can measure those things. And then you can set up your correlations and see if there's a connection and all that kind of stuff. Okay. Now it gets a little tricky, because at that case you might want to separate out men versus women. You might want to, in other words, you would just look at men and their height with shoe size, and women and their height with shoe size, because shoe size is measured differently for men and women. So you might have to separate your data in order to do that, but it's doable. Definitely doable. So anyways, think about 2 quantitative questions. That at least 2. If you want to do 3, do 3. Sorry, that Zoom's done this automatic thing now. When my hand comes on the screen, it tells me that it's going to raise my hand. They keep doing these updates to Zoom that change it, and I haven't figured out how to turn that off yet. So it just is distracting to me. So come up with 2 quantitative questions, 3 if you want, if you think that it's important, or you think it might be interesting. Do 3 questions, that's fine. 2 categorical questions, so things that you can put into categories that we can group people together in. So hair color, eye color, what state were you born in, what country did your family come from? All sorts of different questions where we can put people into these different groups, and then we can measure that in a different way. So you could make a histogram that says, what state were you born in? And we could show, okay, 3 people from Colorado and 4 people from Delaware, and all these, all these different categories that we can put people in. So you want 2 categorical questions. We want quantitative and categorical. The reason that I have these minimums is so that you can use all the tools available to you throughout the semester, right? For categorical questions, you're probably going to want to make a histogram, to go along with it. You're going to want to do some different things so that you can make good graphs, and you can make good decisions about the data and what you should do with it. And then 1 2-choice question, like a yes, no, true, false, night, day, something like that. Students don't always use this one, but that comes into that binary area where it's the binomial. Is binomial theorem in algebra, but it's the binomial work that we do in one of those chapters. I forget if it's chapter 6 or 7, where there's not a required part of the project, because some of you're just going to go, yeah, our 2-choice question just doesn't really fit with the narrative we're trying to tell about this data, so you leave that out. That might be the thing that you want to do. Okay. Now, with that said, that took longer than I thought to talk about, but okay, so you want to be very careful when you're choosing your questions, and you're going to see this when you're working through the book, but we've talked a little bit about it so far, but I want to expand because you're going to have to start putting your questions together here soon. You want your questions to be right? You don't want to create biased questions, right? And this is actually difficult to do. So you can do it easily on purpose. You can make a very biased question, right? So one example is, you can ask a question 2 different ways. You can say, should Ventura raise taxes so that it can improve the quality of its social programs for the people who live in Ventura, right? You can ask a question that way. Or you can say, should your tax dollars be wasted on people who aren't doing enough for themselves? Right? That's 2 different ways of asking a very similar question. You're going to get very different responses when you ask that question, right? Especially the second way is very biased, and you see how it brings up like an emotional response. You hear this a lot in politics. People pose things in a way which are kind of misleading, but they do it. They're doing it to get an emotional response out of you. You can do that with questions. But what you're going to find is you're going to get very different answers than if you just asked it in a very kind of neutral way. So you want to try to avoid that kind of biased questioning, right? You want to avoid this kind of stuff that gets people emotional. We're trying to measure data in that way. So when you're wording your questions, try to leave out the kind of emotional triggers that people are going to have. Try to leave that out and just ask the question. It's pretty bland and middle of the road if you ask, should Ventura raise taxes to improve social programs? Right? That's about the simplest, most bland way that you can ask that question. You could also ask it, should Ventura raise taxes to improve social programs to improve the lives of the lowest socioeconomic people in the city or county? Right? You could ask it that way, but again, you're kind of trying to build up that emotion. You get people thinking about like the people at the bottom of the socioeconomic ladder. Then emotions start to come into it. So do you see how the plainest way to ask that question is, should Ventura raise taxes to improve social programs? Right? Then we're not swaying things one way or the other by the way that we ask that question, and it's very easy to do. Right? It's very easy to do poorly, I should say, where you ask a question and you didn't even think about it, but you asked it in a way that is going to get people a reaction, or they read the question and they think, "Oh, is this a MAGA person that's asking that question?" And then all of a sudden your emotions are coming in, your political emotions are coming in before you ask that question. Or is it the other way? Is this someone who's like, over on the other side of the spectrum asking this question, and then that gets another group of people riled up. You want to kind of avoid that, and you want to ask the questions in just a neutral, flat way if you can help it. The more of that emotion you put in your questions, the worse your data is going to be. It's going to be unreliable, and you might make the claim that it says something, but it's less likely to be meaningful if you're doing that. And even beyond that, it's very difficult to ask questions in a way that is not leading certain types of answers. So, for instance, there was a famous survey done a while back. It was in the news a lot because there were two questions on it that were asked in different ways, right? One of the first question was, there was 20 questions or something. But one question on the survey was, do you support, what is your favorability rating of the Affordable Care Act, right? And it got pretty good ratings. People were like, yeah, this is overall pretty favorable, right? And then later on in the same exact survey, the question was asked, what is your favorability rating of Obamacare? And then that got really, really low ratings. Like people were very, not favorable of Obamacare at all. Right. So depending on how much you follow politics, you may or may not understand why that's a problem. The Affordable Care Act is the official name of what became branded with the nickname Obamacare. So basically, those two questions were the same question. They were asking about the same social program and asking, do you think this is a good program or not? And in the same survey, the same individuals, when it was called the Affordable Care Act, would say, yeah, I think it's a good program. But when it was called Obamacare, they'd go, no, it's destroying the country, right? So that's kind of an extreme case, but it also is a very good way for us to see how, yes, if you ask the same question but with different wording, you're going to get very different responses. So that's why you want to keep it bland and mellow. Unfortunately, it's even harder than that. They've shown that you can take the same exact questions, but depending on the order in which you ask the questions will affect people's responses. If I ask you a bunch of questions at the beginning of a survey about spending, government spending, then I'm basically getting your mind thinking about government spending. So then at the end, when I ask questions about should we spend more, you're more likely to say, no, we already spend enough, because I've been asking you a bunch of questions about spending. But if you reorder those questions, so I ask you at the beginning, should the government spend more money? You're more likely to say, yeah, it's okay if the government spends a little bit more, because your brain wasn't led by those previous problems. So it gets tricky. You have to be careful about the order in which you ask things, and it's not going to be up to you on this survey because I'm just taking the 100 questions from everybody and putting them together in one survey. But you should be aware that that is a thing, right? That's why it's really hard to do statistics well. As you've seen in Chapter 1, setting up these surveys to do well where you're randomizing things, it's difficult to do, it's expensive, and it takes a lot of time. So it's tricky, right? So just try to do the best you can with your questions. Try to ask them in a very flat way where you're just sort of being factual. We're not trying to at this point get people to answer things because of an emotion that we triggered in them, because usually that's a thing that people are going to point out when you release your results. You're going to say, well, look, your questions were very leading, right? They talk about leading questions. This happens in courtrooms. People do the same kind of thing, right? They're asking questions of the juror or of the witness, but it's really about getting the jurors to think a certain way. They use specific language. They use they're asking the questions in a certain order because they want the jurors to think about it a different way. And then the defense is going to do it differently. They're going to ask questions that lead the jurors in a different direction. Well, it's the same thing with statistics, right? So be careful about that. So getting into Chapter 2, so you've got a little bit of time, a couple weeks to kind of work through Chapter 2. And you can see a lot of what we're doing here. We're organizing our qualitative data, organizing quantitative data, popular displays, additional displays of quantitative data. So there's a whole bunch of ways of displaying data. I'm not saying that you should use all of them in your project. You probably should not. What you generally want to do is pick the ways that express your data the best. Right? If you're going to try to make a certain point about your data and say, we think that the people with the smallest eating windows in a day actually exercise more than everyone else, you don't want to show us 20 different ways of that same data. You want to show us the 1 or 2 or 3 visualizations that best support your point, that best make your claim, so that, and that doesn't even mean just choosing, well, I'm just going to do a histogram then. Well, play around with the histogram, play around with the numbers that are in there, and choose the one that best makes your point. Now, that's without being dishonest, right? So there's a whole, let's see. Actually, I don't have time. I'll pick up with that next time. I'll give you some examples of misleading visualizations next time. Right? We'll look at, there's one channel in particular that is sort of famous for much of it is intentional. You can tell it has to be intentional because any statistician would sort of shoot these down. But we'll look at some visualizations where it's clearly meant to be misleading. They're presenting visualizations in a way where they're making it supports the claim that they're making, but it's misleading. It's showing a picture that isn't really sort of representational. It gives people the wrong idea by looking at it. So we'll have some examples of that next time. That's where we will start next time. So when I say pick the picture that best represents your data, I mean, but still being ethical, right? So you're not trying to mislead people. You're just trying to show a good statistical graph that would stand up to scrutiny and the kind of things that we're going to talk about next time, that it would stand up to that, but it also supports your evidence, right? What I'm not saying is, yeah, look at these, see how we did that in class where I showed you some bad visualizations that were misleading. I'm not telling you to be misleading. We want to do statistics in an ethical way so that you can support your claim or whatever it is you're trying to make with your data. You want to do it in an ethical way where you're saying, no, I actually think this is a reasonable way of putting this forth. So basically, when I show you the bad representations, don't look at it and go, oh, that's a way I could support my data. Look at it and go, okay, I need to support the data, but I need to not make those same mistakes that were made on the graphs that he showed us, right? Some of them are just bad on accident, and some of them, the only way you could really justify it is that they're being intentionally misleading. So you'll see that graphical misrepresentations of data. When you get into that chapter, there'll be some examples of that, okay? And then we will go from there. So that's good. So we'll start off next time. Let me make a note here where I left off. So we'll start off next time with some, there are certain things you're not supposed to do when you're representing data. And sometimes if students don't know better, they'll do those things. They'll make those mistakes. So I'm going to point some of those out. And sometimes, it's hard. No rule in statistics, well, maybe some of them, but most things, you can break a rule sometimes, but then you have to be able to justify. Here's why I broke this rule. Right? And then you kind of want to point it out so that no one thinks you're trying to sneak something by. No one thinks, oh, you're trying to mislead us a little bit here. If you point it out and say, yes, I realize that I didn't use a 0 on my y-axis, but that's because my data would have been too crunched together. If you're calling it out and saying, I didn't do this thing, here's why I didn't do it, then it's probably okay if you can justify it. It's when you do something and you're hoping no one notices that you did it, that's when you're going to bring criticism on your work that you do statistically. Okay, so with that said, as always, I will close down the YouTube stream. I will hang out in Zoom for anyone who wants to ask me questions. In fact, it's office hours now. So you're welcome to stick around and ask me questions, and I'll answer them for you. Okay? Thanks, everybody. Keep up the good work. Those of you who are largely caught up, stay caught up. Those of you who are behind, get caught up so I don't have to drop you in the next couple of days. Okay? All right. Thanks, everybody.